That's okay.
My voice is big.
No, that is it. You have to go with your voice.
That is it. Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to the session about Africa-US university-based, city-based partnerships. My colleagues on the panel include Dr. Sonya from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Prof. Kefa M. Otiso, Bowling Green University, I believe Indiana, right? Or am I? Ohio. Yeah. See, I missed that. Dr. Ma Dua, North Carolina Central University, Mr. Lawrence DaQuan, Howard University, and Dr. Larrisha McGill-Youngblood, and Dr. Christopher Paul, North Carolina Central University. One of the beautiful aspects of what is going to be presented is the partnerships that bind cities together, in particularly in recent times, where intercultural collaborations impact the way we view each other around the world. Each paper that will be presented, or brief sessions, my colleagues will have about 7 to 10 minutes to present, to discuss their work, and then we'll open it up for questions. Now, this partnership, as you would see, beginning with Dr. Sonya's paper, is about Ethiopia, if I'm correct, the partnerships between Haile Selassie and the United States. Yes. But something underpins these partnerships. It goes to the 15th century with what we now know as the slave trade. And for me, it was part of the early moderns. And in that case, the way it is constructed in history, we will have to be taking advantage of these new developments as partnership to reinterrogate that history. So without much ado, I would like my colleague, Dr. Sonya, to go ahead and...
It's Dr. Dua.
Dr. Dua.
Yes.
All right, please, go ahead. Come in.
Do I come over there?
The clicker
Yes.
is there, right?
Oh, the clicker's over there. Okay, perfect.
Yes, you can present there.
Okay, I think, can we set up the presentation?
Yes. There it is. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my presentation. So what I'm going to do is to try to give a quick overview of the background to what... Oh, sorry. Can you hear me better? Sorry. Okay. So let me give a quick background here. There are many reasons why the US will become involved in what I'm about to describe in 1950, and I could spend some time expanding on it, but I won't, so I can focus on the university partnership. Instead, I'll use this very brief map as a way to help us get signposts about the parts of about the historical issues I'm about to talk about. So, for Haile Selassie and for the US, the conversations about university-based partnerships will begin with the Battle of Adwa, which is when the Ethiopian troops defeated Italy on the battlefield. In 1935, Mussolini invades Ethiopia. Then in 1941, the Axis are defeated in the Horn of Africa. So I'm just going to continue from there. During the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, In fact, even before that, the US supported the idea that African countries, African spaces are the exclusive preserve of Europe, that Europe has a legitimate basis to want to colonize, to want to dominate African spaces. But that changes in 1942 when the US issues these propaganda posters during the Second World War. I love this poster because it's a great way for you to see how the US is reframing its relationship with Haile Selassie from these people who need our civilization to he's an emperor warrior. Every part of what the US is doing beginning in 1942 has a lot to do with, race relations back in the US, but the other thing has to do with the Cold War. So let me focus on Haile Selassie's part of the story, then I'll switch gears and talk about the American part. We know that when Haile Selassie returns to power at the end of the Axis occupation, he says that he has this plan to modernize Ethiopia. There's going to be 2 tracks of higher education programming to modernize Ethiopia. The first is an agricultural and mechanical technicians training program. He wants to jumpstart a technical revolution in Ethiopia and also address food insecurity. But the second part is he wants a liberal and managerial education program that will help him train a civil service corps to modernize and professionalize the administration of the imperial government. Between 1941 and 1960, it will be something that will be generally accepted, both by the Ethiopian imperial government and by the US government, that the reason why Ethiopia needs the liberal managerial program is because the Italian occupation had wiped out about 75% of the government elite of Ethiopia. When Haile Selassie makes this declaration in 1941, the US is not exactly in a hurry to fund this, but the US is in a hurry to be aligned with Haile Selassie, which is again why they have these posters made. Haile Selassie's desire coincide with the US's own desire for what will be our role in the world at the end of the Second World War. This is best captured in Truman's inauguration address. He lists in this address, Truman comes up with a list of things that he says, this is how we're going to remake the world. The most important is called Point 4. Well, it becomes known as Point 4, where he says we're going to embark on a bold new program to basically take our technical advances to the rest of the world. It is under this program that the US signs the first Point 4 contract for Africa. That's in 1951. The US hires what is now known as Oklahoma State University, but at that time is an agricultural and mechanical college, which is exactly what Haile Selassie is asking for. 2 years later, Point 4 is transformed into ICA. One of the things I find interesting about ICA is that ICA is set up to basically run all of the US's international development projects. When the ICA is being announced, the deputy director of the ICA actually specifically evokes Ethiopia to explain what the US is trying to do into the world, which is we're going to take our advances, our scientific advances, and take it to the rest of the world, the developing world. And we're going to do so through partnerships with American universities. The US was essentially turning US academics and schools into political actors whose job were to go out into Africa and remake African societies and governments into the image of what the US wanted to be. If anyone wants me to expand on what that image is, I can. But for now, I want to focus just on this part of this relationship. So this is Joseph M. Stokes. He is basically praising these partnerships and saying that since 1951, what we've been doing, sending Oklahoma State to go build agricultural and mechanical programs in Ethiopia, it's perfect. In 1960, for instance, Congress cuts funds for African education programs. And when the State Department people are going to Congress to say, give us more money, they are specifically evoking Ethiopia and saying, our programs in Ethiopia are working. You need to keep giving us money. But I have this quote here. This is a specific quote. This is from the Minister of Finance of the Ethiopian Imperial Government, who later on becomes the head of the board of the university. And he would argue that the Point 4 people from Oklahoma are actually just projecting Oklahoma's problems on Ethiopia. He would say, we don't like what Ethiopia is doing. The gentleman he's praising and saying he knows what we want. He's from the University of Utah. Okay. The problem of university-to-city partnerships is that when it's framed as foreign policy, everybody has different things that they want to achieve. A lot of the academics are going there from this view of what we would call a messianic liberalism, this idea that we can be messiahs to Africa, we can bring Western liberalism to Africa, we can teach African civilization. But then it becomes a question of who knows best what Africans need. The problem with Oklahoma is that Oklahoma disagreed with Haile Selassie about what Africa needs, and Oklahoma would do what they believe Africa needs, not what Haile Selassie says Africa needs, which is the reason why they would say that Oklahoma is projecting Oklahoma's problems on them. Let me give an example. The Oklahoma professors were sent to Ethiopia to build a college. They build high schools. They will conclude that Africa is not, Ethiopians are not ready for a higher education program, and we need to give them the basics and teach them just basic high school things. In fact, they start a public health program which is based on the idea that Ethiopians do not understand basic germ theory, and so they need to train people to go out there and teach Ethiopians basic germ theory. So this caused a lot of tensions between the academics who are being brought to remake Ethiopia as part of this US foreign policy project and the Ethiopian imperial government, who have a very specific aim of what they want. Haile Selassie wants to modernize his country and be seen as the foremost country in Africa. In fact, he's imagining this university as a university that will attract students from all over Africa. When he's talking to American officials, that's how he's framing it. So I love this picture. This is a picture of the Utah team who was sent to Ethiopia in 1959. After Haile Selassie complains to America and says, we don't like what Oklahoma is doing, we need a new team, the US hires these gentlemen to be the new guys who will help shape Ethiopian development. And this is something I wrote in there, that the contradiction of African independence and a lack of African resources is that Haile Selassie has this vision of what he wants, and he's dependent on the funding of people who have these ideas of what Ethiopians need, what Africans should get, that is very much wrapped in their own ideas of race. The University of Utah team, though, they do accept this assignment as a foreign policy assignment. In the now declassified documents they send back, they will agree with Oklahoma State that, yeah, Africans are not ready for this. Ethiopians are not ready for this higher education program. In fact, they identify, we were talking about this, a few of them complained that the idea of sending Peace Corps volunteers to Ethiopia is a problem, because what you don't want to do is to do a mass education program that will create a bunch of educated, underemployed Ethiopians, because it will cause political upheaval. But they will say that this is a foreign policy assignment. The US wants us to do something, and that something has less to do with whether we can produce civilization here and more to do with giving to Haile Selassie what they want. So in this case, the Salt Lake City model wins over the Stillwater model. So this is the flyer that was created by the University of Utah showing this partnership that has been designed. They proposed the building of a university that would be called Haile Selassie I University, now known as Addis Ababa University. I have a few flyers of what this university looks like, just to give an idea of the program. So this is the structure that Haile Selassie wants, and I don't know how clear it is on the screen for you, but you can see the different sections of the department has a lot to do with Haile Selassie's visions of which kind of educated people I need in Ethiopia and what I'm going to do with them when I get that. Throughout this era, whilst this presentation focuses on the Utah and Salt Lake, Oklahoma going to Ethiopia, there is also a reverse part of this, where they are bringing Ethiopian students to American universities. So when this is a picture from the report produced by the incoming Kennedy administration about what we are going to do in Africa. And it says, basically, we're going to go all in Ethiopia. So that on November 2nd, the US will announce that we are going to fund a new national university for Ethiopia, despite classified documents saying Ethiopia doesn't need a national university, they are not ready for one. And that the students will accept, the school will accept students from all over Africa. So these participating universities and their environments become sites of Cold War geopolitics. Salt Lake City, for instance, as Ethiopian students start arriving, you begin to find more reports in the news of racial, I'm gonna call it racial incidents. I mean, the students are facing racism. And there's a lot of tensions about that, which State Department officials are being forced to participate in navigating because these students are being brought to Salt Lake City as part of US foreign policy. But then, and this is what I find most fascinating for my work, is the ways in which Addis Ababa is transformed demographically. because that becomes the only university for higher education is in Ethiopia, is in Addis Ababa. So are most of the secondary schools that are training people to go into the university. So you end up having most of the Western educated students, most of the Western educated youth of Ethiopia living in a very small space all together, being able to engage in ways that did not exist before, and it leads to very interesting developments as time goes on. I'm going to wrap up here and hope questions will allow me to expand on anything that was not clear or was rushed over. Thank you for listening.
How about you write down the questions so that, because there is a lot of provocative items that needs to be unpacked in this presentation, and that would allow us to see what other items that would surface as we go through each presentation. So with that, it appears to me that we can start from you, Mr. Toboho Matlo, to come this way. And we'll come back and we'll skip the presentation. Might you please, Mr. Matlu what is in the International Project Manager, South African Local Government Association. Might you please?
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Tebo Matlo, as the Prof has introduced me. I work for South African Local Government Association. What I do partnerships for partnerships in the partnership of the partnerships. So all the international programs that we are doing, we ensure that wherever the municipality is benefiting, we involve institutions of higher learning, like universities. So if we partner a municipality like City of Joburg, we will ensure that part of the beneficiaries is the universities that are within that municipality. So that whatever they produce or they support is supported by data. Because most of the challenges that we are faced in local government is that when we do planning, we need to have a concurrent data so that we are able to support our statement. So we had a few projects that we have done and involved as an organization. Currently, we were in Lund and on a human rights program. So we engaged the University of Lund to also be a supportive role in the project from Sweden as part of the work on how we're doing it. The other one is, the bigger one that we had was the Building Inclusive Green Municipalities. We had 6 municipalities in South Africa and 6 in Canada on that project, but it was more on how we integrate climate change and asset management, because our infrastructure must be resilient to the current management challenges that we are faced today. Disaster, global pandemics, technology. But in that project, we had to work with Simon Fraser to partner with the municipality that I was working with, King Sabata Dalinje in Umtata. So we had to go to that university because the municipality, which was in the municipality of Sari, was the supporting municipality as part of the partner in that program. And the Inclusive of Universities played a key role in development of strategies and how to implement those strategies. And it was industry-based, not as a qualification that is being done without that proper analysis. And we had to match them with Walter Sisulu in Umtata to work together. And in Fredericton, the other side, we also had New Brunswick that was also working with us on the asset management and climate change. And we got a support also from CSIR on Green Book. You can Google it there. It's a nice tool that you can use to how municipalities can also do the plans. But we had University of Pretoria that was also part of developing that. So in most of the international programs that we see value on it is that we are inclusive with universities to work with us. On capacity building, we had the University of California, Berkeley, where we had to train our councillors and officials on municipal capacity leadership so that they are also part of the society that has learned on how they are doing it. And how we do it as part of the partners is that we also do what we call job shadowing with all these municipalities and the universities. So they will bring the universities to come and assist when we plan the project. And we start to plan the project with communities, not municipalities doing it and presenting it to municipalities. So in all our projects, one of the key things that we make sure that we get the support from all the universities is to start with gender strategy. Because most of the issues that are affecting communities now, it's women, youth, on job opportunities. So we get the support from the universities to do an analysis on how we'll be able to mitigate the challenges that we are faced. Even though we are still moving slowly, but surely we'll arrive in ensuring that we have those programs that are there. We had an asset management infrastructure and local economic development on how to respond to climate change issues and the pandemic. We had to put plans on how to recover, but we utilize also our university, which is the University of Nelson Mandela, to work with us on the program that is going to assist municipalities in the Eastern Cape on tourism. One of the things that we learn also from Fraser is on they were engaging communities to develop innovative programs, which is what also the inclusivity of vulnerable population, including the indigenous people that are supposed to be benefiting. Because most of the issues that we do, especially in countries like South Africa, you see service delivery protests, is because we are not addressing the issues that DR has just alluded to. The basic things that we're supposed to be doing, but also not utilizing our natural resources as part of that. And in British Columbia, they're using mountains to also do the tourism. But the university there, what I like about it is the same as, I think, University of Pretoria and Vets. It's within the community. So anything that you consult with communities. So in my last is that in everything that we need to do is that it must be based on research, so that when we implement things that are going to address the challenges that we are faced with, not just to do a research or have a partnership that is not addressing the current needs that the communities are faced with, but be inclusive and at the gender strategy, because it's very key to start at the beginning, not putting it at the back, because most of the issues of women, we normally put them at the back. And with our programs on international partnerships to cities, we start with gender and assess that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Prof. Kefa?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go next. So.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
We're coming this way.
You're coming
we'll
this way.
skip the first speaker and we'll end and we'll start over there again. Then we'll open it up. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program that I'm affiliated with. And as you'll see, it's basically a US Africa City initiative. My co-presenter is Jeremy Coates, who administers the program in Washington. So the gentleman you see here is Professor Paul Zeleza. He's the one who wrote the grant to Carnegie Corporation of New York, and basically got quite a reasonable amount of money to actually start the fellowship. So it's still going on as we speak. The first fellows that were funded were in 2015, and I was privileged to be one of the first fellows that were funded. And I went to Kisii University in Kenya And I went back again in 2016 on an alumni fellowship, and out of that, we developed an MOU with my home institution. By the way, the university is Bowling Green State University, so that is important. I don't want my employer to be unhappy. And out of that, actually, it has created a lot of interesting partnerships, research exchanges, and actually right now we have a major research project on Lake Victoria looking at management of algal blooms that is funded by National Science Foundation. So it has actually achieved a lot of its objectives. So the only qualification is that whoever is getting it as a fellow like myself, you must be Africa-born, and it only works in 3 areas: research collaboration, graduate student teaching and mentoring, and curriculum co-development. And so in our partnership with KISS University, for example, we've actually done all 3, and as of now, 579 fellows have actually been funded. So the fellowship is active in 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa: Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, and Uganda. But you'll see later on that there are 3 other countries that we're beginning to bring into the program. And if you're an accredited public-private university, you can actually apply to the fellowship. So I started as a fellow and eventually rose to start reviewing proposals for them, and I'm privileged right now to be one of the members of the advisory council for the program, which is why I'm actually presenting about it. So I see it as a model, a US-Africa SEED partnership, and I give you a website here that actually indicates, provides more information. And remember, by the way, it's not the fellow who applies. People like myself, you simply join a database that they have, but it's actually the African universities that, for example, will come in and apply and say, I think we want to have Otiso or any other particular scholar that they use based on the needs of the local university, all right? And by the way, I'll make this available later on in case you're not able to write the long URL. So let me just give you quickly some of the statistics from 2015 to 2022. It has funded 579, and you'll see that I've highlighted that the highest number of fellows was just before COVID, 2019 and 2016. And so the round 1, round 2, round 3 that you see at the bottom is basically round 1 when funds were released, round 1, round 2, round 3. But by the way, these numbers do overlap. So as you can see, the peak was basically 2016 when it funded 67 fellows. And you serve for anywhere between 2 weeks and 90 days. So which works very well for academics, particularly in North America, US, and Canada in particular. So you can get any number of fellowships as listed on the right. It can be regular, it can be a multi-institutional, and on. Or it can be an alumni fellowship, meaning you get it for the second time, like I did. But for in most cases, basically the regular fellowship, people getting it for 1 week, 2 weeks, all the way to 90 days. So these are the countries that it's working in. I mean, the original grant is actually the one that went for these countries. I think they had their reasons for choosing some of these countries. Now you see that Ethiopia is on this map. So remember, initially I said 6, but now you can see you have Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Senegal. This is actually a response to the criticism that the program was mostly focused on Anglophone countries and was actually ignoring some of the other countries. And so gradually it just started opening up to universities from the other countries. But officially it's still working in the 6 countries and trying to experiment in the other countries that you see on this particular map. So if you look at who has won the awards, by the way, it's almost like 100+ universities. I only picked the top ones. So I'm not trying to claim that this is the entire list. Notice that the others have actually won it like 402 times, but the ones that are listed here are the ones that have actually got the most fellowship: University of Nairobi, Kwame Nkrumah, University of Ghana, Makerere, and University of Ibadan. And on the right, you see how this breaks down based on public and private and unspecified universities. Most of the fellows have gone to public universities. And on the left, you do see that Stellenbosch University is actually here, and I'm not sure whether WITS has gotten a fellowship or not, but we may have to check in the data. So then if you look at the fields where the fellows are coming from, it's mostly education, engineering, medical sciences, business, public health, chemistry, and on. And the others basically begin to be a little bit less in terms of the number of fellowships that have actually been won from those areas. And on the right side, you see the home institutions where these fellows are coming from, and I see North Carolina is significantly represented. So Florida A&M, and the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. Now, a number of these universities are historically black colleges, but a number of them are also big universities that actually have happened to employ a large number of African academics, especially if they have an African Studies Center that is already connected heavily to the African continent. What about the home states of these places? Now, clearly here you can see North Carolina leads, followed by Texas, New York, Texas, Florida, and then now we jump the border to Ontario, then back to Tennessee, Ohio, Maryland, Missouri, Virginia, Illinois, Georgia, California, and Pennsylvania. So, and then the list continues, but usually it looks like it's mostly universities on the eastern side of the US and Canada. And of course, if you look at it by country on the right side table here, the US by far has provided most of the fellowships. That's not a surprise. Most of these African diaspora scholars are working at American universities. So that is what this looks like it. So what are the impacts as I come to a close? What we have noticed, obviously, in terms of, remember, this is a brain gain type initiative. Everybody likes to talk about brain drain. I myself don't like the term a whole lot. Actually, you're better off talking about brain circulation or brain gain, because remember that if you call it brain drain, but this individual was in South Africa and unemployed, their brains would have been in the drain. Therefore, you don't have a right to claim that actually that is brain drain. It's actually brain drain if the person was productively engaged in the country. But even then, if they are going abroad for the purposes of upskilling, still you are going to be fairly challenged in terms of calling it brain drain. I think in a global economy, we won't talk of circularity and these exchanges of scholars from all over the place. So of course, the accredited universities, for example, the one I went to, initially I was going there to look at curriculum, but I found out they didn't have a department of geography. And of course, being a geographer, I was like, that is something I can do something about. And by the time I left, we had a geography department. Part of it was because when you are an outsider, you can speak to everybody in the university. And people tend to listen to you. But when you are an insider, people are like, oh, we don't think we need one. And actually, it has ended up doing fairly well since it was established. So obviously, then you're looking at the other universities that have been added, and the ones that are in the African Research University Association, which is the ARUA universities, and on and on. But the limitation is that this is actually a demonstration program that is funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. So the funding comes in tranches of about 2 million, 3 million, and it's been renewed 3 times. It's not a small amount of money, but it was actually a proof of concept. Therefore, it's not sustainable unless the program is domesticated by African countries. And actually, wherever I have a chance to speak about the program, this is one of the first things I say, that we need African countries now that they have no excuse of saying, we don't know if the program is going to work. A very easy way of actually bringing back the diaspora. I'm always preaching that if you are in any position of authority, encourage your country, especially the Sikhs, to domesticate the program. They can start by funding 2 fellows, 3 fellows. And by the way, the reason domestication is so important is that even if the country does not provide funding, once the government adopts it formally as something they want to do, other entities like United Nations Development Program and many other people can actually bring in money at that point. And of course, the other limitation is the 6 countries, and with the need to expand to some of the other countries that you see here, and I'm done.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, we're together. Yes. Yeah. Oh. Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Dr. Youngblood. Literally and figuratively, I always say. This is my colleague, Dr. Chris Paul. I am the program director of our executive MPA program, our Masters of Public Administration program in the Department of Public Administration at North Carolina Central University. And my colleague here, Dr. Chris Paul, he directs our traditional track. So just a little, put it in a little context. So the executive track is an accelerated track for adult learners like yourself. You are my target audience. And students can go through the program in 18 months. And then the traditional track generally attracts students directly from undergraduate that come into the program.
Thank you, Dr. Youngblood. So we just want to give you an overview of this partnership program that Dr. Youngblood set up and that I've been able to work with in Liberia and put it in the larger context, I think, of this panel and this conference about how we can get that people to people, like people first capacity building, like we've heard about earlier today and throughout the conference, that overcome some of the barriers and challenges that might exist through transfers of agenda or other ways of thinking about it, and rather think about what happens when we take a person-focused educational program for adult professionals, public administrators, public servants, and use some of the tools of international education to do that. So sort of combining different things that you're likely very familiar with, and I think Sister Cities also does a lot of cross-cultural training and exchange, and try to combine those effectively in sort of a new way or new paradigm of thinking about capacity building through relationship building.
So historically, Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs as we refer to them, have a history of partnering with African cities, African nations. And so the NCCU's executive MPA program, we have partnered with Jamaica, we've partnered with Ghana and Liberia. Prior to me starting in my role in 2016, students traveled to Jamaica and Ghana. So we are reactivating our partnership with Ghana. We'll be taking a group of students there in May for them to participate in the international partnership we have. Our main partnership we have with the Republic of Liberia, well, we took students there, Dr. Paul and I, for 3 years before COVID hit. And so we established a partnership with the Civil Service Agency, which is relevant to the field of public administration, right? And so what we did, or how it works, is we send students' resumes to the Civil Service Agency, and they help us match the students to work in the various ministries within the Republic of Liberia.
So this program, I think, is innovative in the way that it takes working professionals, and you might we call it an internship on paper, you might call it an externship. But really, we're not trying to initiate any sort of skills transfer, but we're looking for a peer-level partnership between professionals from the United States, and particularly North Carolina, and partners in agencies, both at the local and federal levels. But we'll say more about that in the context of Liberia in a moment. And so this is really about exchanging of values between professionals and a shared creation of that public service value frame set. And again, using some of these tools that you're likely familiar with of experiential education and cross-cultural exchange that have a lot of benefits that I think really fit the framework of an executive or adult education program.
So the Civil Service Agency in Liberia, again, is, I've already stated, is an ideal partnership for this program. And we work within the capital city of Liberia, which is Monrovia, which is the largest city in Liberia. And so this makes sense as this creates these national municipal links. Some examples where students have been matched are Monrovia City Corporation, the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Youth and Sports, and the Monrovia School District. So we have students doing their internship or externship in all of these different ministries. And they get to experience working in the ministries and not necessarily being busy work, because oftentimes interns are thought of as go get my coffee or make copies of 25 copies of something. But just like my colleague said, it's more of that capacity building and building relationships and allowing students to experience their role in the United States from an international public administration lens by allowing them to be matched in these different agencies abroad.
Just to give you a few more vignettes of that specifically, these were some of our favorite students and favorite stories, but Jamie Tyndall works in budget and finance for the city of Durham, North Carolina, where our university is located. And she was assigned to basically the mayor's office, the city proliferation in Monrovia. And they really appreciated not necessarily the budgeting skill set she had, but just being able to see that human resources works the same whether you're in Monrovia or in Durham. Maurice has a large skill set in the road building industry in North Carolina, and so the public works loved having him there. But also, just I think that was probably one of the most social relationships that they had in going out. Same, Michael Wagner runs a water and sewer system in a town in North Carolina, and there was sort of mutual surprise at the scope of problems that these systems have to deal with, whether it's in North Carolina or in Monrovia. We have experienced teachers, experienced human resource managers. So that, I think this, and each of these built really close relationships with these departments, much beyond the professional setting, but to the social setting. I think drawing on that reality that these shared experiences, they may differ in geography, but in the experience is very similar for these civil servants in both places.
So here are some of the highlights from our partnership with the Civil Service Agency in Liberia. While we were there, they did a press release on the students. This was the last time I believe we visited, am I correct? The Republic of Liberia. They always did a press release, but we wanted to just provide you with an example there. And then some of the additional highlights are the skills of municipal organizations. Like Dr. Paul said, they're transferable in different settings. University city international partnerships, they empower both the students and the host partners. Again, because they're building those relationships. Oftentimes the students keep in touch with the partners and the agencies that they've worked with over a 2-week period. And those relationships still continue. I was talking to one of the students who traveled and said they talked to their partner, they keep in touch with them on Facebook, email. So those partners, those relationships really are sustainable even after the internship portion is over. And then, of course, another highlight is the university city international partnerships, of course, that help to generate a shared understanding of public administration and public service.
So I think this is the really important part that we want to convey, that universities play a special role in this type of relationship building, the commitment to values not just of education, but of public service, especially in our field of public administration, but in general, the service orientation of universities, I think reframes how you might think about capacity building and the way that relationships can be built in this type of professional development. Our primary goal is to take professionals from North Carolina and help them through this training experience, but it has all these additional benefits in terms of the long-term relationships that have not only resulted in friendships, but nonprofits being formed, and ongoing relationships between our students and Liberian organizations outside of this professional development. And so I think there's really, we activate a role especially for HBCUs that is rooted in a historical context, but can look to this internationalization of city and community partnerships that we're hearing about at this conference. So thank you again, and we'd be glad to be in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot is coming out. Before we begin to open it up, Mr. Lawrence DaQuan, might you please share with us?
Can you hear me? Thank you, moderator. And just a couple of disclaimers before I begin. I'm originally from New York, so forgive me for speaking fast. In the interest of time, I'm gonna.
You've got 10 minutes. Take your time.
I have a lot of slides.
Right.
In the interest of time, I'm gonna try to fly through these slides, and also forgive me for the over-reliance on text. I possibly may be one of the younger people here, but I consider myself to have an older soul, so I don't have as many. I'll try to be as articulate, but I don't have as many pictures. There's no presentation. It's a book that I'm literally just about to talk you through. And I think it's comprehensive insofar that it addresses, I think, what all of the panelists have shared. So without further ado, again, I am also a graduate student at the Howard University in Washington, D.C. So the title of this presentation is Cities and Academic Diplomacy. HBCUs and African universities as incubators for economic development. Lastly, I would also like to say, politically speaking, the left is the middle to me. So candor isn't something that I struggle with, and because we are here in South Africa, which has a rich history of resilience, I'm not really gonna pull punches or hold back in terms of my worldview or episteme of what my country has done to the world, what other colonial countries have done to the world and continue to do to the world. And in my opinion, colonialism still exists in some form or fashion. So I'll just start there. So with that being said, the outline for this presentation is, again, starting with the universities as economic drivers for marginalized populations, colleges in general, but particularly for the sake of this presentation, HBCUs boost local economies. For, again, the context of the presentation, or for the sake of the presentation, I merged two sections, the historical and the modern HBCU Africa relations, which I failed to include North Carolina Central's involvement. So thank you, colleagues, for sharing, which I will add as I continue to do my research. And then we'll transition into African universities and urbanization, and conclude with academic diplomacy, which is my quote unquote idea that I did not coin, and the public-private partnerships that can exist between HBCUs and African universities. So again, forgive me for speaking fast. Considering the significant and increasing youth population throughout the world, unemployment is an issue, underdevelopment is an issue, and economic inequality is an issue. Higher education institutions, entrepreneurial programs, and professional development opportunities are critical for the global youth population. I mention this because we didn't have our bios read, but again, I'm pretty sure everybody's more accomplished than me. In Baltimore, Maryland, I started a nonprofit entitled Strong Men Overcoming Obstacles Through Hard Work, which is primarily a community service-based and skills development-based organization for young men of all walks of life. So it's not an elitist organization. We don't have a GPA requirement, which I personally feel ostracizes and excludes a lot of males who haven't had the opportunity to attend school or who may have had other things that they've had to work on. Whereas many youths located both in Africa and the US desire to attend college, only few have the privilege of matriculating, graduating, and obtaining unemployment. Again, speaking from personal experience here, after I acquired my master's from Johns Hopkins University, I was on unemployment in America. I'll just stop there. I could, give you a lot of context, but I just want you to know that. Cities are the site of many HBCUs and African universities, as other colleagues have mentioned today and yesterday, with sister cities serving as the host of several of these quote unquote minority serving institutions. As Ms. Lorna mentioned yesterday, Washington, DC, which is the location of Howard, and the leading institution in African studies and African language studies, has the most students in America studying African languages. Is also sister cities with Pretoria, or Tswana, as I like to say, Dakar, Senegal, Accra, Ghana, and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Atlanta, Georgia, New Orleans, and Raleigh, and Winston-Salem, North Carolina are all U.S. municipalities that simultaneously are not only sister cities, but also have HBCUs. So this paper primarily, again, focuses on the potential of urban localities that contain HBCUs and African universities to serve as incubators for economic growth and international development. Throughout, I could just say the last century, everybody likes to cite statistics on reasons for poverty, causes of poverty, where crime exists, what we should do about people who are involved in poverty. And as the great Walter Rodney once said, I think that economic development and underdevelopment are like the seesaw effect. So as we like to say, America, or the Western Philian states, or Western society, is the globalized and developed world. We wouldn't literally be developed without the resources that we get from this continent. So to me, that's actually a backwards treatment. The newer states and the teenager of the world, America, is actually the developing world. And here on this continent, this is the developed world, although it doesn't reflect what we would think about development, because traditionally we're prescribing to a European context or a European episteme. Again, I have no problem saying these things, and I like to address them because I think that would allow us to all come to the center to be able to come up with solutions. I don't think I'm smarter than anybody else. So with that being said, I propose academic diplomacy, otherwise known as institutional collaboration among international higher education institutions based both on the African continent and the United States of America. Academic diplomacy is defined as initiatives that include partnerships with municipal leaders, agencies, and universities. So again, the private sector is very important. I'm not trying to omit anybody. I believe that we can all collaborate to help who will inherit this world, which is the youth. They don't own the future, they own now. They have now. So we're all growing. In addition to serving as transformative institutions that catalyze social and economic mobility for their graduates, HBCUs also benefit their local municipalities that they're located in. And again, as I mentioned this, but with that being said, my research specifically focuses on the potential of Africa-based universities to boost economic and social mobility for marginalized populations here. So I think I've kind of alluded to this. The social and economic conditions are vastly distinct in quote unquote developed world, such as the United States, which is a hegemonic global superpower state compared to African states, which are equally as important to the global political economy, yet experience, due to what I like to just call classism or social hierarchy, there's somewhat of a marginalization or tierism as African states are diminished, at least colloquially within Washington, D.C. and around the world. So I propose again, twofold systemic programmatic recommendation, which is again academic diplomacy. And I believe that by establishing intercontinental partnerships among HBCUs and universities in Africa, proponents of such institutions would increase their resources, human capital, capacity, students, alumni, faculty, staff, and parents across the world would benefit from such a network that literally actually already exists. It's just not formal, if that makes sense. So just giving you some more context, recently, a report entitled HBCUs Make America Strong, the Positive Economic Impact of Historically Black Colleges and Universities, found that HBCUs have nearly 15 billion annual impact on the US economy. Moreover, these institutions created over 100,034 jobs, according to the study, and our alumni generate over 130 billion throughout their lifetime. Proponents of the report argue that in rural, suburban, and urban localities, HBCUs produce talented practitioners who support local businesses, and also you could think of them as transplants. Some people move to these cities for school and they stay. Some people move to these cities and then they leave. More recently, a report found that increased funding for HBCUs could help close the racial wealth gap and diversify the American workforce and also benefit the national economy. Again, I just cite some numbers here for people who are more number savvy or who are driven by these things. This is important for you. I'm a theoretical person. I could read or I could speak to somebody who never attended university and learn everything that I feel like is equally as relevant as numbers do. So again, you have some numbers here in terms of, again, things that the potential economic impact that HBCUs already have. And this is, again, being tracked now. So as some people like to say, HBCUs are responsible for a large percent of Black lawyers, a large percent of Black judges, a large percent of Black engineers, a large percent of Black Congress members, despite the fact that HBCUs only make up 3% of the American colleges in America. So that's, if anything, that's, I guess that's disproportionate. So moving forward, sorry, don't want me to move forward. All right. So in the global north, because this is, again, putting this in context and where this is an international treatment, particularly in the US, colleges and universities play a central role to their local economies. That has been proven. The local economic benefits of higher education can be measured against the trend of economic and social decline in some cities, as our moderator actually alluded to with Pittsburgh and Chicago, and again, the industrialized economy earlier during his presentation, that has grown and developed. More recently, with the advent, as I like to say, the COVID-19 pandemic, because it has been an advent, similar to the United Nations was also advent. We've seen online learning. We've also seen the resilience of cities that have colleges and the importance of cities that have colleges as they've been able to, quote unquote, endure or navigate the pandemic. The relationship between city leadership and the heads of HBCUs are also increasingly important due to the economic disparities that African Americans endure. A report produced last year noted that the relationships between HBCUs and city leaderships result in economic growth. More specifically, Rutgers convened members of the African American Mayor Association, as well as HBCU leaders, to discuss, again, the importance of collaboration among cities and HBCUs. That's it. Wow. Okay, so I told you I had a lot of slides. So I had a lot. If anything, I could share all the information for you without being too long-winded. Let's just say that HBCUs have a long history of engaging the African continent from individuals such as Kwame Nkrumah, Du Bois, Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Youth Institute, as well as Ralph Bunche's work in Washington, D.C. Over the course of the last 100 years, HBCUs have been very influential, possibly being responsible for the creation of programs such as the Peace Corps, which was actually modeled after Crossroads Africa, which was something I started at an HBCU. Over the years, again, Howard has been more and more important. Howard was the first institution in America to offer a PhD in African Studies. That's why I'm there. And again, just to get to my, I would say the point, outside of these more recent initiatives and collaborations, again, I really apologize for omitting North Carolina Central's influential role in this. Several HBCUs have taken the lead to somehow create linkages or partnerships, and let's just say exploit, for lack of better words, exploit the potential of partnerships on the African continent, specifically with universities, as colleagues have mentioned. And considering urbanization, which is a modern phenomenon that has led to more cities being produced since the 1800s, these institutions have become even more important. And I will conclude by saying, again, considering high rates of youth unemployment, considering the fact that all youth that do matriculate at institutions don't necessarily get employed, and considering the, I guess I could say the latent connection between African descendants who exist in America, who were the descendants myself of formerly enslaved individuals, not slaves. There were no slaves. There were enslaved Africans. That's what I like to say. I like to put things into context. The institutions, and the importance of higher education in Africa is even more important because historically development professionals have ignored the importance of tertiary education and only focused on primary education and secondary education, as colleagues have mentioned. And I'll conclude, sorry, moderator, by saying that examples of academic diplomacy or outcomes could lead to increased enrollment at both on both quote unquote economic spheres between HBCU students and African university students who, again, are equally important to the economy and should never be overlooked. And I will lastly say that Howard University in the 60s was one of the HBCUs and one of the few even American institutions that had one of the largest international student bodies, specifically individuals from the African continent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to add a footnote to the Ethiopian presentation and the connection to Howard University. Haile Selassie had a cousin studying medicine at Howard University. That cousin, whose name was Dr. Melaku Bayan, knew about the absolutely prodigious efforts and education of John Robinson, who was not Colonel Robinson at that time. So Haile Selassie found out about Robinson through this cousin and asked Robinson to come to Ethiopia. Robinson went to Ethiopia. Robinson led the fight against Mussolini. Haile Selassie made him the head of the Ethiopian military. And as I said yesterday, he is also credited with being the father of Ethiopian Airlines.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. DaQuan. A brief of one line each on what we've heard before we open it up. From Mr. DaQuan, we've heard how rich and the contributions of historically Black colleges and universities in the United States of America, the contributions they've made to the continent. And even he went further and put it into dollars and cents terms of 130 billion. I'm just summarizing here, which is something we should take with us as we go forward. And along similar lines, Dr. McGill-Youngblood and Dr. Paul shared with us the contributions they are making from North Carolina Central State University in Durham, right? Okay. And when we pay attention and look at what they are contributing in terms of relationship among students and the communities and the toolkits that they were building to capacitate the community. And then something they said, maybe in passing, Monrovia, named after President Monroe, after the antebellum, after the Lincoln abolished slavery. It appears to me that they are giving us something, all the presentations, but I just wanted to leave it there in suspense, wherein also Prof. Kefa Otiso presented what the Carnegie Africa program is doing, the countries, the 5 or 6 countries that were initially brought into the program, Nigeria, Tanzania, SA, Ghana, and then it's opening up now. And next we hear from Mr. Matlu, and he is about partnerships, and more partnerships, and collaboration. But it has to be researched by the universities to gain special knowledge of what the challenges are, and then to use those challenges to support the society and to start to look for solutions. And Dr. Sonya Ricks tells us about the partnership which began with the end of World War II with Ethiopia and the United States. But one thing underscores or binds all the presentations together as I open it up to the audience, or 2 things. 1, everybody doesn't agree on what needs to be done. I summarize that as being human. But 2, and the most important, they are all struggling to find solutions, even when they disagree, even when it was not perfect. And it is on that note of trying to find solution and yet disagreeing at the same time, and yet putting so many parts on the table that I open it up to you for questions to our presenters. And if not yet, I don't want to monopolize the position, but I'll start with the first presenter. It's just something you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to say. If there is a question, I will interrupt. Otherwise, we'll go ahead.
So much. So this is from my larger manuscripts that I'm completing. And so there was so much context that I had to cut out. I don't even know where to start unless someone asks me a question and I can expand on it. I think I'm a historian, so I very much come from this was tried, this is the assumptions people came to the program with, this is what they tried to do, this is how it ended up, and then we can hand it over to the policy people to see how we can work with that as we go forward. And I think that's very much seen in the larger project. So sometimes it can come across as being very critical of the actors, but it's not critical for critical's sake. It's about helping us, encouraging us to pass, to basically engage with and acknowledge what was before we make plans for what we want it to be, if that makes sense.
I have a question for the North Carolina people.
Yes, please do.
In my presentation and in theirs, North Carolina is all over the place. It's at the top. What is in the water in North Carolina?
Yes.
We are really lucky in North Carolina to have the largest number of HBCUs, I think, of any state in the United States. And that comes, North Carolina is a complex state. It's complex geographically, it's complex historically.
Yes.
And so yeah, we're very proud. Of course, at North Carolina Central University, we feel like we're central to the state, but as was listed in DaQuan's presentation, a number of really impactful HBCUs across the state and with long-term relationships. And I think Dr. Youngblood mentioned some of the historical partnerships that existed, and I was also fascinated to hear in your presentation, DaQuan, some of these the historical implications from models that went far beyond the HBCUs, and maybe and as I think often the case, the work of Black scholars is sort of forgotten in that whole process, that spillover. So yeah, I think there's an interesting layered question there.
Do you want to add to that before we go to Bob for a question? Go ahead if you.
Oh, well, I just wanted to add to your point you made in summarizing all of our presentations, in that we are not always going to agree, right? And so that kind of connects to what we have our students do, our students do as part of their capstone, and in that they identify and synthesize and analyze a problem, right, that they may have observed while working in their ministry, assigned ministries, and then which then we provide them the opportunity to, like you said, provide recommendations for improvement, because public administrators, that's what we do, right? And so that's kind of how, you're not going to agree on everything, but at least they have the opportunity to reflect on that and write about and research and provide recommendations on how we can continue to build those relationships.
Thank you. I'll come to you, and Dr. Ricks, I just want to add, you need not apologize for being critical, because I think if I hear you well, what you are saying is that you're trying to look at it from all perspectives, recognizing that we as humans, we never get it right all the time, and that we can learn what we can do better. That's how I understand critical thinking. Sir, go ahead.
All right, I think my question can be answered by any or even all of you. I think the two components here, one is universities, the other is cities. On the universities end of things, it looks very clear. Universities are what they are. On the cities end, in some respects, we have city governments, increasingly being called subnational actors. But in some instances, national governments have a very major hold or influence or anchor on the cities. Now, where the uneven cleavages here, universities, by their very nature, unless they are Chinese, are always very critical by their very nature, because we do research and then we, in offering solutions. In fact, some universities say we do not exist to offer solutions. We are here to just criticize. And city governments and the national governments, for that matter, are run by politicians who have very thin skins. You say something based on your research, and they say that Kefa Otiso from that university is our enemy. So now we are trying to bring these two entities together, and you can see there are already these frictions and tensions. How do we then build partnerships when on one side one wants to be candid, on the other hand one wants to be mollycoddled and handled with lots of decorum and so forth? And I think many of your papers spoke to that. Thank you.
May I call on you, Mr. Matlu, to begin this, because you've done partnership, university, and are they always critical?
Look, thank you very much, Prof, for that. When all of you landed here, where did you land? OR Tambo. It's a local government sphere. So it shows that everything should start there. When you land in an OR Tambo. It's a local government sphere. You are not landing at province or nationally. Get what I'm saying? You need water, you need ablution facility, you need a phone to connect. All the services that are there require local government to provide service. So as I'm saying, local government, it's a sphere where actually our challenges are coming there, and the support that we need to do, it must be based on research, the data, and the infrastructure, as you see, is being depleted. But the issue of the politicians being otherwise on the other side is that they are from the same communities that you are coming from. They are not from the sky. They are from the same community that you have been going up and down, engaging with them. It's only that we need to move away from the traditional model approach of being autocratic to become participative. Most of the, I won't shy away, most of the, I went to MTN, the big organization, then I asked, we wanted to start a partnership with schools on environmental issues to plant trees, which is a basic thing, but no one thinks about it because it creates job for other people. And I asked the leadership, they says, do you all know your councillors or the leaders in the community? They said no. I said, you see, you'll keep on complaining to say councillors are not working, but we don't participate at the beginning of that. So we can change the narrative by saying, as communities, I think the colleagues that were with me outside there, we spoke about this. We don't want this kind of leaders, so that we when they lobby political parties, we are putting input on say, who do we want? Do we want councillors with minimum qualification? Do we need to professionalize the local government in different countries so that we don't have anyone with, others are saying, because I'm popular in the community, I'll be able to lead the community without understanding the basics of local government. You can't approve a policy if you don't understand it, if you haven't researched about it. The current challenges that we are faced across the world, it's that autocratic that everybody thinks is right, as you're saying, but they are not engaging. Even if they engage, but because academics are coming with a research document, they don't want to agree on that because you're not in line with what they want to do. But how do we change the narrative? It's us. We've got powers as communities. We've got powers to make it proper. Normally I say people must not protest in South Africa now. I'm giving an example because I'm here, but I've seen other countries where they protest is peacefully. But here when we protest, we ban property. And we think somebody must fund that property. But it shows the caliber of the youth or communities that we are bringing. I think almost everybody was presented here. The target is the same. It's knowledge. We need to impart knowledge, but we're not far from that. But all I'm saying is that even if you can professionalize the sector, as long as we are scared to tell the truth, we'll have these challenges that we are faced. But if you are honest and being able to tell a wrong is a wrong. But because we are captured, I want to use that because somebody will say, no, keep quiet because I'm giving you these things. But if you come out, the society is not protecting those that are willing to put it there in writing. But I'm saying academics can assist in writing, but we must open up in local government to be inclusive so that they are able to practice what they have done there. Because before you become where you are, you started in that school that is under local government. So in summary is that everything happens at local government, and it's a sphere where we need to focus, because even when you do diplomacy and that history, it started there. It started you as a young one to grow up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll come to you. There is a question from the audience.
No, lastly, it's culture issue. Culture issue.
Yes.
Yeah, culture is very key to understand all our cultures. I think he did well to put that, all of us. The culture is also very key to understand each other. run coming with the big brother approach, but to understand each other on, yes, they are universities, but what is that you want to put out there for communities to understand that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There is a question from the audience, and I like the way you summarized it. A great American speaker put it very simply. Every politics is local. His name was Tip O'Neill, a Democrat from the state of Washington. Every politics is local. That's where you win or lose an election. Anyway, please go ahead.
Is this on? Yeah, my question was, and you partly answered it, Dr. Youngblood, when you send students abroad and they're working in public service, I wonder, do they see issues that they can present solutions to? But I also wondered, when they come back home, did they have some learnings from their experience where things may be progressive? We always think in the United States that we're the leaders and we know everything. But there are solutions abroad that they can bring back. And are they able to then impact local areas of public service where they can also say, hey, we saw some other things that work better. Can we do that? And I just wondered, do they carry on research, and are you collecting lessons learned?
Yes, I can yes to that question. Dr. Paul, he actually facilitates the course, the capstone course, where they're able to think about those things. So I'm going to let him expand on that. But they do. We have had students to come back and just in their reflection say, you know what, they're doing something that we could do better. So because in the context of the conversation, just like you made your point, the U.S. doesn't do everything right. And, we can learn from other countries and other cities as well.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a really great point, and I think central to the growth that our students have. The reality is that there are a lot of systematic forces that exist in institutions, and going to another country, any other country, or going to another setting allows us to see those systematic features. Certainly, in Liberia, the institutions, these agencies have many fewer resources than, say, even the city of Durham has, and yet, many of the types of challenges are the same in terms of institutional respect and communications of mission, a commitment to public service, and I think many of those lessons are universal. And so there's sort of those two things. Like one is recognizing what you have in your control, and then one is being able to describe systems that are out of your control. But once you can describe them better, you can. And so I think there is I think a special role for us at an HBCU. To take predominantly Black students to countries like Liberia and get to reframe what organizations look like, the way and understand what sort of systems of power dynamics exist both in the local organization and also structurally even to the global scale.
Mr. DaQuan, please go ahead, and then I'll end. You will have there is a question? Yeah. Please.
I was actually going to ask Brother DaQuan a question. I have a two-part question, actually, and it ties into a point you made about cities being business. First question I have for you, Brother DaQuan. Do you know Nadif Bracy?
Yes.
Okay. The second question I have for you, and any of you can answer it. Thank you for the historical retrospective that talks about the economic impact of HBCUs. Do all of you, or do any of you, have leadership guidance on your HBCUs serving as anchor institutions or as leading economic development entities? That ties into this brother's point about the local government is obviously the point of departure, but what roles do your organizations play, or do your leadership teams play in moving the economic development conversation forward? So I wanted to start with you and then move forward.
Thank you for the question. I'm just going to try to be really quick so I could be quiet and go home and stop, wasting your time. But just to wrap up to Dr. Wakesa's question, to kind of go all the way to exactly what you just said. This is, again, forgive me for being so candid. Universities are also, quote unquote, colonized sites. Again, in my opinion, there's this battle to decolonize education. What does that mean? For those, again, we all have a different approach. Before we got to universities, what was this first school that we went to? Before we actually went to school, what do we do? Who was responsible for us going to school? These are not rhetorical questions. The Xhosa word for grandmother is umakulu. So umakulu, as there's scholars in this country, which I like to focus on, which is where my research focuses on, grandmothers as institutions of knowledge. All of us, black or white, anything in between, because we like to subscribe to these racial paradigms. All of our parents and grandparents didn't go to have formal education. Yet here we are still having these quote unquote colloquial conversations. So to go back to your point about local governments or local communities being important, before we even participate in the city, the first institution that raises the children is the family. So what is the importance, or what is the value of the family? More yet, what is the value of the woman in society? African society in the world, and again, just to wrap up, all educational institutions aren't necessarily progressive. And because we have to apply for grants, and because it's a capitalistic society, excuse me if that's a surprise, there's actually an industrial complex. So there's a process of being able to get funding, to be able to do your work, to be able to come to Africa. So again, I'll be quiet and go home.
Any other questions? There will be two last words here. You have the last word. You go ahead, and then you have the last word.
Okay. So we brought up Lincoln in our conversation. So I'm going to tell two stories about Lincoln in 1963 that will help capture something. So when Kwame Nkrumah became the first president of Ghana, he went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. So he started having these conversations with the then president of Lincoln University about ways in which they can develop partnerships with Lincoln. In fact, the president of Lincoln University was present at Ghana's Independence Day celebration. Okay, so the other part of it, the foreign policy part of it, was that before every visit with Kwame Nkrumah, the State Department and the White House will be briefed with the Lincoln University president about certain conversations they wanted him to have with Nkrumah. And after every visit to Ghana, he would have the same, where he would repeat conversations he had with Nkrumah to help the US understand how Nkrumah thinks and how they can best engage with him. The second story about Lincoln University, and this isn't meant to be a critique, this is my saying that whatever partnerships that we are entering into universities with, we should be aware that we don't see the full picture of it. So like say in 1960s, Lincoln University also started a thing that they called the Southern African Program. Publicly, this is just a thing that Lincoln University was doing with donor funds from institutions, including the African American Institution and IIE. Actually, it was funded by the State Department and the CIA. The goal of the program was to identify, and I'm reading it out here from the declassified documents. The goal of it was to specifically target students from Portuguese Africa, from the liberation movement active in Portuguese Africa, to make sure that by the end of Portuguese colonialism, the US would have identified and formed relationships with people who will form the next generation of leaderships there. The goal is for them to form the kind of relationships that Nkrumah had with the Lincoln president, so that at the very least, no matter what their orientation would be, the US would have that access to them. In fact, they hired someone who is well known for his leftist politics, John Markham. He wrote the book on the Angolan liberation movement. John Markham got fired because he went to Angola and he hanged out with FNLA, which bothered the US because the US's problem was, we want to contact MPLA. When you publicly seem to be aligned with one actor, you are affecting our ability to use this program to do what we want to do. And the program is very explicit about what it wants to accomplish. It wants to identify people who have the potential to become future leaders of independent African countries, to make sure that America has avenues of influence over them through whatever means. So that's kind of what I mean by, I do come across as negative, not because they don't exist, but rather to encourage people to take a step back and I have so many other stories of this. My entire book is basically an overview of, this is what the US government is thinking back in DC. These are the people they are working with to help accomplish. This is what happens in Africa and the consequences. And that's kind of what I was hoping would come across without coming across as I'm criticizing Lincoln, because it's a great university, yay. But to point out that there are so many angles to the story that we don't always see. When the US sends Oklahoma and Utah, for instance, the US isn't sending them because the US thinks we want to pay for an actual university. The US thinks if we train the people who become the next generation of Ethiopian leaders, we will have influence over them. when US officials go to Congress, that's specifically what they are saying we have influence over the next generation of African leaders because we train them. And when they want advice from people, they ask us for advice, which was happening. And that's kind of what my entire manuscript talks about, but I hope it comes across here a little bit more about.
Thank you. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Professor
I think I'll make mine brief.
Yes.
Maybe let me start with this one. Jamie, you remember the conversation we had last night. It is the nature of superpowers to basically wipe out competition. I mean, you are calling it US policy, whatever it is, but that is the nature of the beast. Every superpower has basically gotten by. I mean, look, you go to a game park around here, you'll see that lions don't like hyenas don't like leopards. It is the nature of the beast. Number two, the issue you were raising about universities and towns, I think you went back to the old discussion of the tension between town and gown, which we have had for a very long time. They are not bad actors on either side. It is simply a contest for power. And quite frankly, to me, if you find two people who agree completely on anything, one of them is unnecessary. Thank you.
And on that note, we could continue here for a long time. I'll just highlight two things in under a minute. One, the whole panel is about human struggle to make the world better. And whether it is on with an altruistic way, or which may not always be to make it better, but yet we are becoming better. And another thing that comes out of it is that there is a reflection. We're not just interrogating the institutions, we are also self-interrogating and self-restructuring. And may I put on the table that prior to 1994, there were maybe 3 or 4 provinces. Now we have 9 in this beautiful country. So we are not only restructuring the thinking, we are restructuring the geographical space. The last 2 things I would mention is the youngest country in Africa, South Sudan, is still going through birth pains. And the 2 older ones, Liberia has come up often and on. I would like to add the other one with the capital, Liberia, which is liberation. That's what it is about. And this time it's about capitalist liberation from capitalism, not as a socialist concept, but as the access to be able to do what you want to do within your station, non-violently. And there, I bring the name Sierra Leone with the name Freetown, with the hope that when we set others free, we all set ourselves free. Thank you.
All right, that was quite an interesting panel, I must say. Sorry. As our panelists make their way to their seats, I think you can clearly see that we are onto something major here, based on just the presentations and the discussions. And I'm sure all of us can't wait to read these papers. Many of them are already submitted as drafts. But the first thing I wanted to find out is that we are going into the Black History Month, and we'll start that shortly. But I wanted to find out by a show of hands, and my colleague Tluma is observing this, who are the delegates who would like to visit our university this afternoon. We just want to make sure that so we can say roughly 10.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to join you on that tour. If you get there before 5, you must go to Cullen Library. There are 3 paintings there that define the modern world. My view. I wouldn't speak for everybody. One was about Bartolomeu Dias leaving Portugal. Then what happens in the Cape? Second, British trying to move people to settle in South Africa. Third, post-apartheid commissioning and a criticism of colonialism. Those three paintings constitute the modern world. They are large canvases. Sorry I wouldn't be there, but I hope you will see them. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Prof. You know, Prof. Namdi's office is very near Cullen Library. I think that's why he knows it very well. It is it's the Africana Library on campus. So I think this is where he spends quite a bit of his time. So cheers. Thank you. Right.